reason. So let's hope the sound is all right. We're stuck with this. How can I? There is some way to minimize this. Okay, all right. So that's going to be it. So as I was saying, yeah. So this chapter is a bit big, but I'll do everything on the computer so that we have a trace of everything. So. And why is it big? Because here we start with something completely different from what we've seen before. So before, everything that had to do with trade was generated by differences. So country A, country B trade. Why? Because country A has something that country B doesn't have or is better at doing it than country B. So you need to introduce differences. Otherwise, you cannot explain trade. So you cannot know why two identical countries would trade. Why? Because if I'm if we go back to our our model about specific factor models, for instance, then if you have the same exact factor composition in your country, then the relative price of producing both goods are going to be the same. So you're saying, oh, let's trade with my neighbor, but if the relative price is exactly the same, then what's the point? It's like being a store and buying something $10 and selling it $10. Are you going to make a profit? No. So there's no point in doing it. Let's just leave everybody to do their own stuff. Yeah. So, but here in this framework, then there is gain from trade. Why? Well, because even if I'm perfectly equal to my neighbor, if there are what we call increasing returns to scale, or yeah, that at the country level, the market level, or the firm level, then it's still better to say, okay, I'm going to focus on one thing, you focus on the other thing. Why? Because by the sheer fact of producing more of that thing, I become very efficient at it. You are efficient at your own thing. So it's a bit like if you are, I don't know, if you choose somebody to work with on your work, you might be two identical people, but then you say, okay, well, you do the computer part, I do the writing part. And just by the fact that you start doing the computer part, you become good at it, and the other does the writing part is better at it. And then you both gain from specializing, even though ex ante you would have been quite as good as the other at doing both things. So this is where we're going. All right, so here's the organization. So economies of scale and international trade. So market structure, imperfect competition. This we're going to spend some time on it so that we can reach this part here, monopolistic competition. So this, by the way, so I don't know if I told you about him, but Paul Krugman, yes, no. So he really developed this thing. Before him, so increasing returns to scale, imperfect competition. This is Messi. And before him, so he got the Nobel in 2004, I think. And before him, people wouldn't touch this topic with a poll because it's just difficult to do it. But the very neat thing that he does is to use these ideas and create very simple models that encapsulate everything that we want to understand the phenomenon and and make sense of it. So the people had in mind these ideas before, but just coming up with the right model and the right way to think about them was brilliant, and that's why he got his Nobel Prize. Yeah, and so then we go to dumping, external economies. So this thing is a bit lighter. I would doubt that we get there today, so probably next week. Yeah, this part there. Maybe we can talk about it, but I doubt it. And then at the end of the chapter, I have, so the model that they present here, I think it's okay, but it's not super satisfying in my opinion, because you still have things that are sort of that are not really explained. So things like what's the size of the economy. So they just take it as a given, and so I made my own little model where everything is endogenous, and I'm going to give it to you to think about. So it's a set of questions at the end of the chapter, and then after that, we're going to do it together in class. All the same ideas are going to be in it, but the neat thing is it's a bit different, so you get to see, and I prefer it to that one. But we're going to do that, and then so they don't have a. So I talked about the gravity equation of trade, which is a direct consequence of these sort of ideas there, and it's become extremely popular in the last maybe 10 years. I would say in almost all of economics, that's one of the most successful equation to describe a phenomenon, to predict what will happen in the world. So I would be sad to not talk to you a bit about it, but this obviously these slides are super old and they didn't know anything about this back then. But I have found a nice set of slides from the UN. So yeah, if I have time, I'm going to go through that. And that's basically all everything we're going to have time to do, in my opinion, before this. Anyways, you have so much to study, so I think we both agree that it's enough. I could go on, but I think it's having case studies and presentations and stuff. It's more. It's nice to change things up a bit. Okay, so here we go. Yeah, so this is what I was just saying. So countries engage in international trade for two basic reasons. Oh. Yeah, okay. So, as I was saying, countries engage in trade because they differ either in their resource or technology. So, in their resource, that's the, if you remember, that's the specific factor model. And the technology, that's Ricardian model. So this is what we've seen before. But now what we're going to see is countries trade in order to achieve scale economies or increasing returns in production. So is economic, in the sense, is the Ricardian model bad or the specific factor bad for not acknowledging this? No, it's just that the world is complicated and we have to simplify it and to highlight the features that we want to talk about. But of course, and if we had a super complicated model of everything, then in a way, it would be impossible to make sense of it. So they're all true in their own right and all false in their own right too. At the end, though, we're going to sort of integrate both ideas from specific factors and from increasing returns, but not in a very complicated way. Yeah, as we're going to see. Yeah, so, and this feature here, so this chapter, so we have two models of international trade with in which economies of scale and imperfect competition play a role. So monopolistic competition model and dumping. So both are, dumping is sort of a, it's more of a, if you think about, so if you just have a monopolist in one country, then you can see that that monopolist is going to want to use dumping to increase their profit. So that's what we're going to see at the end of the chapter. But today we focus on this part here, monopolistic competition. Oh yeah, and one thing, so this is Melitz as so this is Melitz has introduced yeah, firms varying size. So I had initially planned to talk about Melitz. No way we go there. That's Krugman with something on top of it. So we have to start with somewhere. Okay, so model of trade based on comparative advantage, as I said, Ricardian model, use the assumption of constant returns to scale and perfect competition. So what do we mean by this? So there is no inherent extra benefit from producing a large amount or a small amount. So yeah. So what we mean by that is the cost per unit of produced is always the same. So if you have a very tiny country and a very large country, they can both trade and yeah. So, but they will trade if there are differences between them. Yeah, so increasing the amount of all inputs used in the production of any commodity would increase the output of that commodity in the same proportion. So imagine that I have, say, capital and, yeah. Example, if I use capital and labor, if double, yeah, if capital is multiplied by 2 and labor is multiplied by 2, then the result is costs. Well, I use twice as the amount of capital, twice the number of workers. So what happens to my costs? Well, I have to pay double than before. So costs are multiplied by 2. But the hypothesis is that here, so since there is constant returns, which means that production output is also multiplied by 2. So there is no impact of having a larger scale. But what we say here is that many industries are characterized by economies of scale, or what we also call increasing return. So, for instance, what you would get is something like capital multiplied by 2 and labor multiplied by 2. So costs are multiplied by 2, but then you would observe output being multiplied by 3, for instance. So it means that, oh, it's if I have the opportunity to produce more, then let's produce more, because my output is much better than before. So what kind of do you have? So let me now make you intervene. Do you have ideas of industries in which that would be the case? Yeah, possibly, but so do they use that much? The first part, I agree quite a lot. Yes, because just you buy in bulk. If you need a large factory, then yes. I still think for producing sodas, for instance, you can produce it in a small factory. But yeah, if that was the case, yes. So what I have in mind is yes. So industries which require a large amount of resources. So, what I have in mind is, example, cars, car industry, airplane industry. Yeah, so car industry, you take Elon Musk. He looked crazy to initially to build his mega factory in California. But he pulled it off, and now he's just it's so efficient the way he's producing his cars, because everything is done automatically, and everything goes smoothly. And now he's just taking over all the other car manufacturers in the world. Doing that in span of maybe 10 years is just a miracle, in my opinion. Or if you, yeah, so example. Mega factory, Tesla. And then he's going to, now he wants to make a gigafactory in Texas, so he's not done yet. He wants to invade the whole world with his cars. And the other is airplane industry. So which are the big players in the world for airplane industry? This you should know. Have you taken the plane once? The ones who, yeah, I don't, okay, so ones who build their aircraft. There's one in the US, one in Europe. Yes? Yes, exactly. So Boeing, Airbus. And then in the medium size, you would have had something in Quebec, Bombardier. And in Brazil, we had Embraer. But what happened to Bombardier and Embraer? Are they still producing their things in their own on their own, or don't know? So What? Yes, exactly. So Bombardier, so now sold their aircraft division to Airbus, and Embraer sold to. So this is like it couldn't be a better demonstration of this phenomenon. You need a whole continent to build one to build airplanes, because they're just so complicated, so involved, and there's just so that Bombardier was a very big company and making very good products, but still, just for the sheer size, you can put pressure on it, and they couldn't compete on the world stage. They had to essentially sell themselves to Airbus, and same for Embraer. Eventually, they partner with Boeing. Yeah. So that's the big duopoly of airplane production around the world. Yeah. Right, move on. So under increasing returns to scale, so this is what I just said. So output grows proportionately more than increase in all inputs. So if you double all the inputs, you more than double the output. So it's always better to be a larger company, because you're going to make a better product more cheaply. So what does that mean in other words is that the average cost, the cost per unit, always declines with the size of the market. Oh, yeah, so this is the size of the market would be external economies of scale. Which we're going to see a bit later, but size of the and of the firm. So this is what we would call internal. So is that compatible with perfect competition? Not at all, because perfect competition requires many, many small firms. And so if you have a firm that can always outcompete its rivals, if it's bigger, then you just eventually get bigger and bigger, and eventually you get a monopoly. So here's an example of such relationship. So here you see that the output goes from so input goes from 10 to 15. So you increase by 50% the inputs. So this is just labor, but then the output doubles. So then what's the average labor input? So average is the labor input is how many workers you needed per unit produced. So it's total labor input divided by output. So what you see here is that initially, if you have a small firm, it's 2, then 1.5, 1.333, 1.25, 1.2. So it's always cheaper if you have a bigger production per unit. So this is what I was talking about. So you can differentiate between two phenomena. Internal economies of scale is a bit better, easier to explain, and we're going to focus on it, but external does exist too. So the cost per unit depends on the size of the industry, but not necessarily on the size of any one firm. So an industry will typically consist of many small firms that can be perfectly competitive. So an example of this, I would say, is one example I like is Shenzhen. I think it's written this way. Not sure. So what you have many thousands of small manufacturers in one city. And to a similar extent, Montreal. So what is good in Montreal? What is Montreal competitive in? That looks a bit like this. Well, you might not know it, but yeah, exactly. So software, and especially video games. And what's happening there? Well, all these people are at the same place. So what can they do? Well, they can help each other. So if I have some problem with something, then I can just go to see my neighboring firm, which might be a competitor, but still may be able to somehow help me, and I could help him later on. So there's sharing of knowledge. So especially if you go to Shenzhen, so it's like a whole big industry, or a whole big firm that produces all sort of electronic stuff that can export to the whole world and be very efficient at copying stuff, at emulating stuff. So they really take over, and software too. They are also able to share the same set of workers. So if I don't like my boss, I can just, as a worker, go to the other firm there, and I can basically transfer the knowledge I learned in one place in some other place. So if I want to work in the video game industry, then I know that I have just to go to Montreal and go to the NAD center if I want to learn computer graphics and all of these things. So there's a big advantage in sharing this, in everybody being at the same place. That's somehow something that's been lost during the pandemic, because if everybody's at home, then you don't have as much interaction between people as you would if they're all just chatting with each other at the coffee machine. So hopefully we go back to a normal state of affairs soon. And then internal, yeah. So example is so for instance, Boeing Airbus. So the cost per unit depends on the size of an individual firm, but not necessarily that of the whole industry. Market structure is imperfectly competitive, which with large firms having a cost advantage over smaller firms. And basically smaller firms just get eaten at some point. They cannot compete. Nobody would say that Bombardier is a small firm, and yet they had no chance at all to compete against Airbus and Boeing. Even if they were on a slightly different segment, so they were making smaller planes. So, but still, it's just too hard. And to some extent, they were better planes than Airbus and Boeing, but still, it's just you cannot compete against them. Yeah, so both economies of scale are important cause of international trade. So if you have internal economies, then one consequence can be monopolistic competition, and that's what we're going to see today. Hopefully, if we get there. And then external, then this is something we're going to discuss later. Have you heard this term before, monopolistic competition? Yes. Okay, all right. Have you seen these models? No? Okay, so. Okay. So now we're going to see this. So this is with internal economies of scale. Firms are aware that they can influence the price of their product. So that's the big difference between this situation, imperfect competition, and perfect competition. Perfect competition, I'm just a small firm. I know that the market price is 10, and whatever I try to do, I'm not going to change everybody's intention of paying $10 on the market. If I charge more, then they're just going to skip my store and go somewhere else. Imperfect competition, what happens is I'm large enough and what I produce is different enough that if I decided to charge maybe 11 instead of 10, then I wouldn't lose all my customers. So some of them would go away, would try to buy something different, but some others are, for some reason, they like a lot what I produce. So I'm able to somehow extract this small extra price on them. And the whole game of imperfect competition is for firms to decide what is the optimal quantity that they produce and sales price so that they can extract as much as possible from their advantageous situation on the market. Yeah, so they know that they can sell more only by reducing their price. Or another way of saying it is if they want to make their price higher, then they have to sell less. So here I'm just going to, so for those who maybe have seen this before, so this is the non-discriminating. Or oligopoly. So what do I mean by this is that I charge the same price for all the units I'm selling, okay? But it could be possible if I was super smart and I'm able to somehow segment my market, and then I'm able to say, okay, so you guys, I know you have a big purchasing power. I'm going to sell with a higher price to you, and somehow prevent you from buying something else that I'm going to sell to some other segment of the market. So an example of this would be maybe actually, so airlines, for instance. So what they do is they have so many ways of segmenting the market. So what they do is they sell, okay, first class, and then economy class. And then, oh, well, we're going to introduce business class right in the middle. And we're going to make economy class bad enough that people in business class are going to say, no, I don't want to sit in economy class. It's too bad. I want to pay more to have a better seat and better food. And of course, the trick here is to make sure that once you buy a ticket, then you cannot resell it. So that's why when they sell you a ticket, you have to give your name and passport number and everything. And then you cannot just say, oh, I'm going to give my ticket to somebody else. No, they don't allow that, because that would not allow them to segment the market. So this is a whole other business in what we can call discriminating monopoly. So here what we have a simple case where the monopoly is not able to discriminate. So then there is this trade-off between selling a cheaper product for a larger market or a more expensive product for a smaller market. So imagine it's an airline that just have one set of one type of tickets for the whole plane. Yeah, so here we say that each firm views itself as a price setter, choosing the price of its product rather than a price taker. So price taker would be a perfect in perfect competition. So I take the price as given is price taker, but I set the price as price setter. So the simplest and perfectly competitive market structure is a pure monopoly, a market in which a firm has no competition. Yeah. So why would a firm face no competition? So people who have seen this already, do you remember? No. Here we say that a pure monopoly is a market in which a firm faces no competition. So why is that? Why can't other firm enter the market and compete against it? Yes. Yes. So yeah, that's the consequence. So some other input, yeah. Mm. Yeah, if you bought everything. Okay. So that last point, I would say it's an argument that's been called the infant industry argument, which basically says, oh, our local producers are very bad and not technologically advanced, but it's just because they face unfair international competition. What we can do is close our borders and use our internal market to develop our local producers, and then they become good at what they're doing, and then we open up again. So I'm going to discuss this argument at the end of this chapter. It's not been super successful, mainly because the local producers usually they're never as good as they would be if they just faced international competition. But yeah, so the basic thing that we see is so reason for lack of competition. What we call barriers to entry. So there are reasons why other firms cannot enter. So one is limited resources, all but by a single firm. So for this, I would have a good example is the Bears diamond. Um, almost monopoly. Sellers. So why are diamonds so expensive? It's not super rare. It's just that the bears, they buy everything and they store it in their big vault. and they artificially restrict the amount that's available to buy at any single time. So that way, diamonds are expensive and they're super rich because of that. One is big fixed cost or high fixed cost. It's sort of related, but not exactly. So big example is like any sector which requires big infrastructure. Like energy. So hydro-Quebec is one. Here, for instance, water distribution, phone lines, but that's an old example, which is not that relevant today, but the phone lines, yes. Another reason, another barrier of entry, yes. Marketing.
Like for everyone,
Which one? Which you call? I'm sorry, I didn't get it. Oh, diamonds. Oh, yeah.
Like diamond is forever, it's on the mind of people, and like people, if you go to people in the street or if you go to like 5% of people would say to you that diamond is rare, and but people don't know that. But like for example, with only what people in the movie with diamond or something like that, and so on, and that's why diamond is a monopoly are so expensive. People don't really know.
Yeah, so but the reason is why wouldn't some other firm be able to just compete against the bears?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Now
So
it's lower, but like 20 years ago, they are more than 90% of
oh, okay, you know more than I do. Yeah. So in a way, so what you may say is if I'm a big firm on the market, then I can try to flood the so an example was Trivago. So they just flood the television with always their stupid advertisement, and then so people have just this in mind. So yeah, in a way, they just somehow take control of the market. But so it's not always sure that they succeed. But I'm looking for some reason why really there's no way for other firms to challenge them in some way. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a bit linked to fixed costs. So yes, so big investments. And once you have them, then you're so if you've seen once the TV show Shark Tank, so that's always the killer question that they ask at the end is yes, but what's your unfair advantage? So what's going to prevent some competitor to just look at what you're doing and say, oh, I can do the same thing. and then there's no reason for me to give you money and expect that you're going to do better than this other person there. So that's the key thing. It's so what have you done to basically beat everybody else and make it so that we would like to have perfect competition in real life, but what do all entrepreneurs in the world are trying to do? Well, they're trying to not have perfect competition. They're trying to be a monopolist in whatever they do and make profit. They don't want other people to challenge them and take away their market share. Yeah. Yeah, this a big thing I have in mind is SpaceX. So it was so difficult for them to just imagine creating a rocket that would land by itself, but now they have it, and they're the only people in the world that succeeded really in doing this. So now they have such a huge unfair advantage. So yeah, it's very hard for somebody to think, oh, I'm just going to myself have create rockets that land by themselves again. It's just yeah, they have yeah, they're very hard to challenge. So what I had in mind is patents, um, licenses. Um, so what's droit d'auteur? Hmm? Oh yeah, copyright. Thank you. Yeah, so then what happens is you did invent something, and now I grant you the right to be the only person who use this new idea, this new invention of yours, or this new song that you wrote for some time. So what does that make you? It makes you a monopolist in that specific domain. And this is going to be very important for monopolistic competition. Yeah, so these are complicated things. Why? Because it's good to have patents, licenses, or copyrights to encourage people to invest in new stuff. But then once these things exist, then it would be good to just distribute them for free. So a good example is vaccines, for instance. So they cost billions to develop, but once we have them, then we would just like to ask Pfizer, please give your vaccine to all the world for free so that everybody can be cured of COVID. But then they did have to invest a lot to produce them, so that's a thorny topic. All right. So here, Monopoly, a brief review. I'm not going to just do a brief review. I'm going to see that more in detail. Yeah, so marginal revenue is the extra revenue a firm gains from selling an additional unit. Yeah, no, I'm just going to yeah, go to my other screen there. So, extra notes. Okay. So market structures. Say non-discriminating monopolies. No oligopolies. And finally, monopolistic. So that's a big amount of things that we set for ourselves, but yeah, I'd like to just make sure that everybody is on the same page about all of these things. Oh yeah, and by the way, I'm going to share this new screen. Okay, so let's start with perfect competition. So I'm always going to assume that firms want to produce stuff. So usually when we present the firm theory, we ask different questions such as, will the firm make a profit? Will the firm produce? Will the firm decide to close down but pay the fixed cost? So we're not interested in all these things. We just are going to discuss the basics. So what's the optimal quantity the firm is going to produce? What's the profit that this firm is going to make? That's it. We just what we need to go further. So imperfect competition. So a firm maximizes, and up to now I've been presenting the profits as function of inputs, because we had, for instance, a choice of do I pick a number of workers, a number of an amount of capital. Here, we're not going to look at this because, again, what we care about is not the relative inputs. It's all about scale of production. So we have a single choice variable here, which is quantity. So all we're going to ask ourselves is, what's the quantity that the firm wants to produce? So the problem that the firm faces is this. So nice. And then the firm chooses one thing, so Q, and the profit is phi of Q. So I'm going to choose Q is quantity, phi of Q is profit. Okay. So what is profits? What are profits made of? Somebody remembers this? I have two sides to my problem as a firm. What do firms do? Yeah, they sell stuff. And so how does selling stuff affect their profit? Louder, please. Yes, not necessarily though. So if each unit costs me $10, but I just make $5 by selling it, then I'm going to make less profit, right? So there are two things that matters for profit: is the revenue that I get minus the cost of using. So is revenue from sales and is production cost. All of these things are a function of the quantity, because of course the more I produce, then the more revenue I should have in principle, but we're going to see it doesn't have to be the case. And more expensive it is to produce. This also usually is the case. However, there are situations in which it's not the case. The revenue is what? What's the revenue made of? Price times quantity. And this is important for a reason we are going to see later. But so this is what a firm in perfect competition faces. Whatever they choose to sell, the price doesn't change. The price is the price. It's like $10 and that's it. So that's the promo of the firm. And now, first order conditions. So I always write them FOC for short. So if I want to maximize something, I take the derivative and set it to 0. So then I'm using a big D there because that's the derivative with a function of a single variable. So D profit, D quantity equals to D revenue, D quantity minus D cost, D quantity. And this has to be equal to 0. I'm not going to discuss second order conditions. You just have to assume that they're always satisfied for a maximum. It's not a math class. I like using some math to have like a math and a graph and this explanation, but not abuse it either. So what is this? What is the RDQ? Oh, you want me to make it larger? Yeah. What is the RDQ? Somebody knows? RQ is this. So if I take the derivative with respect to Q, what do I get? R of Q equals this. So RQ. This is just a constant from the point of view of the firm. So if I take the derivative, then just this goes away. It's equal to price. What does that mean? It means if interpretation if I produce one more unit, my revenue increases by the sales price. So that's what it means. I was producing 100, then I increased by 1 unit. How does that change my revenue? Well, If I can sell it $10, then my revenue increases by $10. And where C of Q dQ is what we call the marginal cost. Margin. And in some way, the RDQ is marginal revenue. So the marginal revenue has to be equal to the marginal cost. So going back to what you said, so if I observe that if I increase my quantity produced by 1 unit, then the revenue increases more than the cost, then I should by all means produce more. But then I might get to a point where for some reason I cannot make so much extra profit or so much extra revenue, and my cost increases by a lot more. So in that case, it would be bad for me to produce more. So the maximum is the sweet spot in which the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. So what we say is that optimal production so dr dq equals dc or price equals to marginal cost. So you may have seen this already if you have learned the theory of firms. So price equals marginal cost. So this is what firms do in perfect competition. So this is I should put this in like this is the important relation for perfect competition. Right. So this you have to remember this. And then we can ask what is the resulting profit. Well, I choose Q optimally, but then the profit I get is this. So profit is so it may seem weird to you what I'm going to do, but it's going to make sense later on when I do some drawings. So you're going to see where this is going. So let me just substitute this P times Q. And then I'm going to here pre-multiply everything by Q. And then to be able to do that, I have, of course, to multiply and divide by Q here. And so then I can put Q in front. This is what is C of Q divided by Q. Total cost divided by the quantity produced. If my total cost is 1,000 and I produced 10, then 1,000 divided by 10 is yes, average cost. Average cost. So you see that will I make a positive or a negative profit? Well, at some point, all you have to ask yourself is what was the average cost of producing my units? and what was their sales price. So if on average it cost me $5 to produce my units and I was able to sell them at 6, then for sure I make a positive profit. But if I'm in trouble, I have a hard time selling my stuff and it costs me a lot to produce, then maybe average cost is over the price, and in that case I would make a negative profit. Profit if P is where AC of Q is average cost. If on average each unit can be sold at then at a higher price. Then it costs produce it. Oh, midterm, let's open this. No, that's not the same class. Yeah, I'm going to say this later. I become stressed when I don't save my stuff. Okay. So I think let's draw some stuff. Yeah, okay. So let's draw some stuff. So this is, we're going to show what the firm decides to do. So this is the quantity, and this is the price per unit. So let's have a marginal cost that looks like this. And then the firm traces a market price that is constant. This is constant market price. So what's the optimal decision of the firm? What is the quantity that the firm should choose to produce? Okay, I'll let you grab it. I'll give you a hint. In economics, when all you see is two lines that cross, then there's something interesting happening when they cross. Let's see that again. Yes, so I think what you want to say is you don't want to produce something here, right? Yeah, exactly that. So what's happening? So constant price, So if I choose to produce, say, 1 unit, then this unit, I can set it at price P, and the marginal cost to produce that unit is, say, 1. So here you see that P is like maybe 10 squares. So I get a very good deal out of this first unit I produce. So let's increase production. Then I increase until the point where marginal cost is exactly equal to price. This last unit here, I'm basically indifferent to produce it or not, because it when I sell it, I get back exactly the money it cost me to produce it. But if I still carry on and produce more, then as you rightly said, well, here it's too expensive, and I can just sell it to the market price, which is below the marginal production cost. So I don't want to produce it. So where am I going to? Oops. So this is the optimal production. Let's just, this is Q star. Optimal production. P marginal cost of Q star. Here is just not, it's not multiplied, it's just to see that it's the best decision the firm can take in perfect competition. And now, what do I have to draw to know what the profit of the firm is? Well, I have to draw the average cost, because that's what we've seen before. It's the profits depend on what's the firm's average cost. So here, I'm not going to discuss too much what the average cost is. All you have to know is that usually firms have some fixed cost to start producing. So I have to buy my factory, I have to buy my machines. So there's a big chunk of investment I have to start to make before I start producing. So if I only produce 1 unit, then what's my average cost? Then it's super high. It's like I paid the 1 million to buy my gigafactory, and if I produce 1 car, then the average cost of that car is 1 million divided by 1. So that's very, very bad. But then if I produce 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cars, then the average cost per car goes down, because then I divide by 6, 10, 1,000, 10,000. So I want to, I want to get back my money as much as possible. Or in French, you would say it's coût d'amortissement. So I want to have the biggest production volume. Or do I? Well, here I'm in perfect competition, and you see that the marginal cost is increasing. So it means that initially I'm going to decrease my average cost, but at some point it's going to increase again, because here I'm beginning to be very inefficient at producing my last units. So the average cost is going to look like this. So it's very high initially, and then for some reason it's at its minimum when it crosses the marginal cost, and then it starts increasing. So this is the average cost. And let me just give you a small intuition why is this is the minimum of the average cost. If I have, say, a class of students that have, on average, at the exam, they were able to have a score of, say, 80%. And then I add more students to the class that all have a grade below 80%. So they have like 60% at their exam. And then I ask myself, so how is this influencing the average grade of the exam? Well, if I add to the class more not so good students, then the average grade of the class decreases from 80 to 79, 78, 77, because I add grades that are lower. So this is what happens here. I add units that cost me, have a marginal cost that is lower than the average cost. So the average cost is decreasing up to this point where it's equal. And then what happens there? Well, so imagine again, it's the class. Now the average students have a grade of 75, and then I start adding students that have a grade higher than 75. So what's happening to the average grade of the class? Then it starts to increase again, increase. So this is why the average cost is going to be crossed at its minimum by the marginal cost. And where is going to be my profit in all of this? Well, as we've seen before, the profit is price minus the average cost multiplied by the quantity. So I'm going to try. This is the it's a quantity Q star. Well, yeah, it's Q times price minus average cost. So it's what we have just seen in mathematics, but you can see it here. So it's how many units were produced. And then for every unit, what was on average, what was the profit for that unit? It's price minus how much it costs on average to produce it. So this is the profit in perfect computation. Yeah. Questions about this? Again, if you have done some economics before, you probably have seen this. If not, then it's all new stuff, but I have to not take too long to explain it. All right, so just before the break, I'm going to ask you, so here, do I have a positive or a negative profit? For this situation here. So the profit is this green box there. Is it positive or negative? Yes, here it's positive profit. Because the price is above the average cost. In the long run, firms make a positive profit, what's going to happen? Yes. So in that situation, that's what the firm is going to do. But at the industry level, so if I don't know if pizza becomes very popular, and then pizza makers in Montreal make a good profits. So what do you think is going to happen to that market? Yes, so the price is high. So because there's high demand for pizzas, so then firms make a profit. So in terms of the long term, what's going to happen? Yeah. Okay, so this is a bit complicated, price war, because what we are assuming is that firms have a choice in setting the price that they want to set. But here we're in perfect competition. They just take the price as given. But so what's going to happen? So let me ask you opposite questions. If firms make a negative profit, if firms make a negative profit, what will they do? If I'm always losing money, what's the optimal strategy? Yes, yes. So firms exit the market. So that's the nice way to say it is firms exit the market. That's what hopefully we don't want to do as a firm. So, so if firms exit the market, what's going to happen to the market price? Yes, because there's less supply, so less people to try and compete against each other. So market price goes up, and then what happens to profits? Profits start increasing again. So now let me go back to my initial. If they make a positive profit, then what happens? Firms don't exit but enter the market because there's money to be made, and so this poor pizza person doesn't have an unfair advantage. There's nothing that prevents other restaurants from entering the market and competing against it. So what does the market price do? So it goes down. And the profit starts to decrease. The profits decrease. So what do we see? Well, we see that this is, in some sense, self-regulating, because if firms make a positive profit, then eventually, because there is free movement, free possibility for firms to enter the market, then then they're going to do it, and the profits will decrease. And if there is negative profit because there's too little demand, for instance, then firms lose money and they exit the market until again profits are back to where they were. So in the long run, so profits will what will be 0. So that's very depressing That's something when economists say this, people are sort of discouraged. Oh, so why should I start a business if I'm not going to make a profit? Well, that's life. It's just so if you're in perfect competition, then it's a bad idea to start a business because you're just not going to be able to have any advantage over your competitors and make up the investment that you make. So then profits are so 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 what do we see? We see that price will be equal to average cost. So here I've drawn the average cost here, but in the long run, the average cost will be exactly equal to the market price, or rather the market price would decrease in the long run. So to be exactly here. So let me put this in. This would be the long run. 0 profit. So a firm by itself cannot change the market price, but the movement of all firms in the market will be such that the price eventually adjusts to the market structure, at which point, so this is in the long run. In the long run, 0 profit. Yeah. So I know we're at the break, so we're going to see what happens when there's a monopolist. So I'm just going to go back down. Yes. In the long run, price equals average cost. So we're here. And what's neat is you can really see that on this market, there is a natural dimension of firms. So a natural size of firm is exactly this. For this quantity, firms shouldn't be too large or too small. They should be exactly this quantity. So this would be under situation. Okay. So that's all I'm going to say about perfect competition because we have to move on to imperfect competition. So if there are no questions, we can go to the break and go back to 12, 15-ish minutes. You are Johan, right? So yeah, I just replied to you. Sorry if I was busy this. But yeah, if you have questions, there's office hours. Okay, so shall we start again? All right, so let me go back to again. I hope I was sharing the screen before. Anyway, all right. So just to conclude, in the long run, profits should be zero because firms are free to enter and exit the market. So price should be equal to average cost. All right. So that's perfect competition. And now we're going to see the other extreme, which is monopoly. And again, that's non-discriminating. And what's happening with the monopoly? So for some reason, um, there is a single firm on the market. And as we said, there's with few substitutes. So it doesn't matter if I'm a monopolist at producing one kind of I don't know, one kind of electricity. If anyways there's my neighbor who produces exact same kind of electricity, it has to be a market where consumers are locked in some ways. And as we've seen, oftentimes they're increasing returns to scale. Meaning average costs always decrease with a larger production volume. So what does that look like? Well, the problem is exactly the same. So result is that firm, the monopolist, sells to the entire market. So at some point, can I produce an infinite quantity or not? Or I'll let you copy this. All right, so what happens there? if I sell to the entire market, then is it fair to assume that price is fixed, whatever my production is? No. So price is not exogenous, or yeah, it's not fixed anymore. It's not constant. It will be affected by the production decisions at the firm. Firm problem. So that's exactly the same. But here I have is here I had P times Q before. So this is exactly the same as before. So what the monopolist wants to choose is the optimal quantity to maximize the profits. And the profits are revenue minus the costs. So here is where things are going to change. Before we had that the revenue faced by the firm in perfect competition, or here I use the triple line. Did I use triple line or double line before? Oh, I used double line. Just so it was P times Q. And now what did we say? Well, now we cannot assume that price is constant, because if that would be so, then I could produce an infinite amount, always sell to with a positive price. That's not the case, because at some point I don't have consumers anymore. When everybody has 3 cars in Canada, then sorry, but you cannot sell a 4th car to everybody in Canada. At some point, people don't want to buy them anymore. So the only way for you to increase your production is to somehow decrease the sales price. So what are the revenue? The revenue is P times Q as before, but the only difference is that now price is a function of so is a function of so that's the only difference, but it makes a big difference in the end. But so that's the key things that that happens is that now we have P times Q. Before we would just have P by itself. P would be a constant. Here it's a negative function. Right? So now first order condition is the same. So what does the firm do? So the firm's maximizes the profit. So it's the first derivative of the profit equals to the first derivative of Q minus first derivative of the production cost. And this has to be equal to 0 to maximize profits. All right. But here the difference is what is going to be this. DRQ DQ will be equal to what? So here I don't want to confuse you. So before we had that the first derivative of revenue with respect to quantity was price simply. Now what happens? Have you seen rules of differentiation with products? Yes, no? Yes, okay, so that's what we have. So we have a product of two functions of q, right? We have q multiplied by a function of q. So if I take the first derivative of this, I have how many terms? That's far away in your memories. So it's going to be so I have to aside. If I have yeah I'm not going to go into this, but so just bear with me. So what is the derivative of the revenue with respect to quantity? It's equal to, so I had to take the derivative of this multiplied by this and the derivative of this multiplied by this. So it's yeah, that's how you take the derivative of a product. So let's start with taking the derivative with respect to q. So I get p of q, and this is exactly what I would have had before, because it's just that this wouldn't have been a function. So this is the same. But I have this second thing that is going on there, which is that the price is going to change when I increase Q. So here I'm going to have dP of Q. So this is the derivative of the revenue. And how do I interpret this? If I increase the production by 1 unit, then the revenue increases by selling this unit as P. But what's the second term there? What's happening with this one? No idea. Oh, sorry. I'm going to zoom it. So this is, so what I'm asking is, when I increase my quantity produced, what's the impact on my revenue, right? As a firm. So I have, well, I take that I differentiate R of Q and I get two terms, P of Q plus dPQ times Q. First term here is the same as before. If I increase my production, then by 1 unit, then I can sell that unit and I make this sales price P. So I get P more money in my bank account as a firm. But there is this second thing happening there, dP of Q dQ times Q. And then I'm asking you, what's the interpretation of this? Too advanced? Okay, so I'm glad I'm not going too fast. So second thing is dP of Q dQ. What is this? This is how much the sales price must decrease or decreases if um, more units are sold. So again, if I sell 2 cars to every person in Canada that can buy a car, and then I want to increase my sales even more, then what do I have to do? Well, I have to make cars cheaper. It's just I'm if the price of cars is like $12,000 or maybe more, $20,000, and that's how many cars Canadians are willing to buy. Then the only way for me to, as a monopolist, I'm the only car producer in Canada, for instance, to increase the amount of cars sold is to decrease the price of cars, so that people are going to say to themselves, okay, yeah, well, I have two, but maybe I can afford the third one if it's cheaper. And so what's the impact on my revenue of this lower sales price? Well, it's going to decrease the revenue I was making on all my previous sales. Because as we have said before, it's a non-discriminating monopolist, so I have to sell all my units at the same price. So, so if I have to lower the price of production the price of my cars, then I lose revenue on all the previous cars I would have been able to sell. So which decreases the revenue of all Q units being sold. So this is what I was saying before. It's possible that I increase my quantity sold and I actually lose revenue. Why? Because the only way for me to increase my quantity sold is to decrease the price. So this is the key problem with the monopolist. Well, it's not a problem, actually. The monopolist is happy to be the only firm on the market, but then has to need to have this in mind when the monopolist decides how much things to sell. And now, so question. What is the sign of this? Is it positive or negative? So you just have to look at the previous sentence there. So if I want to sell more units, then I have to decrease my sales price. So this is how much the price is going to change if I increase my sales by a single unit. So the price has to, so it has to be negative. So if, for instance, my price was 10, I'm able to sell 10,000. If I want to sell 12,000, I have to sell at the price of 9, for instance. All right. So Yeah, so and the rest is the same as before. Result. And this is still so we have that this is the case. So the R dq equals dc dq. And the R dq is this. And this is the marginal cost. So since dpdq is negative, it means that P of Q must be higher than would be otherwise. So in a sense, the monopolist is setting its price higher than a firm in perfect competition. In perfect competition, you sell price equals marginal cost. And here for a monopolist, it's price plus dpdq times q, which is equal to the marginal cost. So, and this is negative. So this has to be larger than it would have been otherwise. Higher price. Perfect competition. And again, this is the key relation here to understand monopolists. In other words, so P is larger than P. Perfect competition. So let's do a small example, because this is quite abstract. So I'm going to give you a small examples, some small visual examples, so you can see what's going on. Now we're just going to solve it here, and then I'm going to do the graph. All right. So assume that the market demand is P of Q. Market demand is P of Q equals 13 minus Q. Okay. So if it's firm at perfect competition, they would just have a price of 13. But here it's 13 minus Q. And we're going to have cost, production cost. What did I choose? 12 plus Q. All right. So let me just discuss so the average cost will be what? So C of Q equals, oh, what was that? C of Q divided by Q. So that's equal to 12 plus Q divided by 2. So that's equal to 12 divided by 2 plus 1. Right? Here is 12 divided by Q plus Q divided by Q. So that's 12 divided by Q plus 1. By the way, if you miss something, don't worry. I post everything online when we're done. So what happens with the average cost if I increase my production? Does it go up or down? Increase or decrease? Production level. So that's a question. My question to you. Does the average cost increase or decrease with the production level? Yes? Yes. Because here, if Q is larger, then the average cost would go down, go down, go down. So what's going on here? Well, my marginal cost is constant. It's just a certain unit, a certain price to pay per extra unit that doesn't increase all the time, but I have this huge investment of 12 that I had to pay initially. So, and this investment is going to be to become smaller and smaller and smaller per unit as I increase my production level. Because the initial can between more units of production and each extra unit always costs the same. Well, all right. Last thing we can discuss is the marginal cost. So that's MC. Put this. MC of Q. That's equal to the derivative of cost with respect to Q. And this equals to, so that's just the derivative of 12 plus Q. That is, somebody knows it. Just going to let you think of it. Anybody knows what is the marginal cost? the cost is this 12 plus Q. So the marginal cost is the derivative of the cost with respect to Q. So that is 1, right? So 12 is constant, so it goes away. And here, this is just 1. So as you can see, the marginal cost is 1, and the average cost is 12 divided by Q plus 1. So whatever the quantity, the average cost is always higher than the marginal cost. So it makes sense that the average cost always decreases because there's never a minimum for average cost, basically. So the firm always wants to produce more and more and more and more. The average cost is always going to go down, and the marginal cost is not all that big. It's just 1 per unit for forever. All right, so now let us maximize profit. So so then it's P of Q minus Q minus C of Q. And now let's just show what this is. So it's equal to P of Q is 13 minus Q. That's Q minus C of Q, which is 12 plus Q. So I just substitute the examples I put in there. And what do I get? First order conditions. I get first derivative of profit with respect to Q equals to so this I have two terms with Q inside it. I'm going to let you copy. Yeah, we're not going to see dumping today. I'm afraid. It's all right. We prefer going more slowly and it's actually learning stuff. So here, as we have been saying, we have two terms. So if I take the derivative of Q here, so I get only 13 minus Q. And then I take the derivative with respect to the Q that's inside this. So this is multiplying this Q there. So I get minus Q. And I get minus, so 12 is, it goes away, there's nothing there. And then here the derivative of Q is 1. This is equal to 0. So this is my marginal cost. And this is what? So this is marginal revenue. So it's equal to actually 13 minus 2Q. And this is what we're going to see a lot if we have linear demands. So if you have linear demand, then you get that the marginal revenue has a slope that is twice the slope of the price. So just to reassure you, what we're going to tell you, what we're going to do next is now we're basically done with the math there, and then I'm going to go back to graphs and show you, like with the numbers, what the graphs look like, so you know what we've been doing. All right. So result. This is so 13 minus 2q. So 13 minus 1 is 12. That 12 minus 2q equals 0. So 12 divided by 6. All right. And I can compute the price. P of Q, P of 6 equals to 13 minus 6 equals to 7. Yeah, sorry for those who are not super good at computing derivatives and additions and subtraction. And based on the result of your homework, I'm going to assess what your level is and what I can ask and not ask you at the final exam. I'm going to try to do something in the middle, but at least if you're really unfamiliar with derivatives, just refresh just derivative with for linear functions. That would be a plus. It's going to help you at the exam for sure. Okay, so this is the result. So I'm going to not go further. Just now we're going to look at what happens when we draw all of these things, and then I can come back and compute some more things such as the average cost and the actually, yeah, the average cost, I had it. So here, average cost is this. All right, so let's do that. And we're going to mostly be done for today. And just to tell you, by the way, where we are. So market structure, so we did this, and now we're doing this. But then there's Cournot oligopolies, and then there's monopolistic competition. So this is more difficult, and this is more difficult. But so we're getting there. So, but yeah. All right. So, nice sheet. So, monopolist. Okay, so let's, how did I do that here? Yeah, I have to go to 13. So if I just use this, yeah, that's good enough. Okay, so 13 squares. Yeah, no, let's use 26 squares. Let's have something big. So 5, 10, 20. So that way you can see what we did computationally and see on the graph it's the same. So here I'm going to have so that's 5, then if I go to 26 here, so that's 30. And the price was 13 minus Q, right? So I have to go to the same length. So perfect competition, we would have a horizontal line, a perfectly elastic curve, perfectly elastic demand. Now we face the whole market and we sell to the whole market. So what was our marginal cost? Marginal cost was, do you remember? Was 1 exactly. So that would be 2 squares. So that would be here. And now the important thing is, if I'm a firm in perfect competition, then the price is the marginal revenue. Here, the marginal revenue was marginal revenue. So I'm going to draw it first and then talk about it. So let's use, I don't know, yellow maybe. Then I'm going to discuss. So it would be 13 divided by 2, so that's 6.5. So times this 12 should be here maybe. No, that's yeah, I think that's here. Or maybe my drawing isn't that good. Yeah, I think that's good. Marginal revenue. Just going to try. Equals 13 minus 2Q. So why do I know this is the case? Well, I'm just going to show you again. So you see that the marginal revenue is the derivative of the revenue with respect to Q, and I get what? I get 13 minus Q, so 13 minus 2Q. So the price is 13 minus Q, but the marginal revenue is 13 minus 2Q. And this is something that you're going to see a lot with, or all the time with linear demands, that yeah, the marginal revenue has a slope that is twice as big as the revenue, as the price. So going back here, marginal revenue is 13 minus 2. This. And this is equal to the marginal cost. So I get the price of, so this is my production cost or my marginal cost of production for the firm that I set to the marginal revenue. But then what I get to do is not sell at this price there, but sell using the demand curve. So I sell at this very high price, which is, as we have computed before, 7. Finally, what is the, so I'm going to, so this is, yeah, this is the, so Q star goes to, what did we find? We found 6, I think, yeah, which makes sense. That's 12 squares. So here. What is the average cost at 6? So go back to your computations there. Average cost was, of Q was 12 divided by Q plus 1. So if Q equals 6, average cost is 3. Nice. So I'm not, I can't draw, average cost is a very hard curve to draw, but the only thing we care about is what it's equal here. So that's, this is 1, so this is 2, this is 3. This is the equal. So I was using purple for average cost. And then with this, I can know what the profit is for the firm. So let's try this. This is, let's see. Profit. So I let you compute it. So profit is again the difference between the sales price and the average cost multiplied by the quantity. You know what the profit is? Oh, I think I made a mistake here. Then later on, we can check whether we made a mistake or not. No clue what the profit is? Johan. So the profit is always sales price P, which is here 7, minus the average cost. Yeah, so this is marginal cost. Average cost. Multiplied by the quantity produced. So it's 7 minus 3, which is 4 times. So that's a profit of 24. So the firm is making a very good profit. And this is just to show that what we inferred about the average cost is true. So the average cost is always decreasing because the marginal cost is constant. The marginal cost is always below the average cost. So the more I produce, then the cheaper it gets per unit. Optimum. Marginal revenue. Marginal cost. And the profit is always the same. It's price minus average cost. Multiplied by the production quantity. So here the firm is making a very good profit, and competing firms would like to enter this market, but for some reason they cannot. So that's why this firm enjoys a very good place. And that's the dream of all firms. It's become a monopolist. Questions about this? Or maybe it's just too fast and you haven't had time to think about any questions. So I'm going to let you some time to digest it. But yeah, so mostly that's what it is. So yeah, if I don't have any question, I can continue for a few minutes still. Maybe talk about Cournot just before we leave. So this is what we had, and then just to confirm profit. So it's so it was producing 6 equals to 13 minus 6 times 6 minus 12, 6, and that should be equal to 24. Yes. 4. And also we know that it's equal to price minus average cost of 6 times 6. Which is equal to 7, which we just computed there, minus average cost at 6, which was 3, times 6, which is and so that's the monopolist. Now, with perfect competition. So what? So in perfect competition, the firm would choose P of Q equals MC of Q. In perfect competition, the firm produce such a price marginal cost. So it would forget, basically ignore this term there. So we can ignoring the impact. So if the firm was somehow not a not thinking like a monopolist, then it would just pick price of Q equals marginal cost instead of choosing marginal revenue equals marginal cost, right? And so in that case, the firm would produce, so the price is 13 minus Q equals to 1. So equals to 12. So interpretation. So the monopolist and and the price would be equals to 13 minus 12. So the monopolist produces lower quantity than the firm perfect competition. Produces 6, which is smaller than 12. And sells at a higher price. So here the price is 7, which is greater than 1. All right, so 7 is the price sold by the monopolist, and 1 would be the price chosen by the firm in perfect competition. And of course, so the monopolist makes a positive profit. But the firm in perfect competition would get a profit of so really that's the last thing I'm going to ask you to compute. So just copy this and then think what the profit would be for the firm in perfect competition in this situation. Somebody knows what the profit would be for the firm in perfect competition? In this example. So let's just compute it. So here the firm chooses to produce 12 and the price is 1. So it will be equal to 12 times 1 minus the cost, which is 12 plus 12 plus 12 plus Q, yeah. 12 plus 12. So that's equal to minus 12. So that's a very dumb thing to do. Yeah. Why? Well, because there is a fixed cost of 3. And so the revenue just covers the margin cost. So this, if you remove this fixed cost there, then the profit is exactly 0. But here we have, of course, a huge fixed cost to pay too. So in that case, just adding a small detail. So this is what you would call natural monopoly. So example, electricity production. So that's the reason why you cannot have a market for free perfect competition market for electricity production, because you get this huge fixed cost to start producing. And so then if firms produce such that the price equals marginal cost, then they just lose money all the time. So you need some sort of public monopoly. Okay, so I think that's the only thing all I'm going to say about monopolists. Yeah. So just to briefly to talk about Cournot. So just we're going to start here next time, but just to see where this is going. So in Cournot oligopoly, so Cournot was so he developed this theory around the beginning of the 20th century. So that's old stuff, really old stuff. And so what is assuming is the following. So we have a uniform product, just like so for the monopolist. So imagine something like oil production. So a big number of firms that produce oil. And so the product is essentially the same for the buyers. So you can buy a product from your oil from, say, let's look at the actuality. So Russia or the United States or Saudi Arabia, it's oil is oil. And then how the firms in Cournot competition work is they say, okay, I'm going to take whatever my competitors do as given. So I'm just going to assume, well, I'm Venezuela. And so I'm going to assume, well, okay, Saudi Arabia produces 10,000 barrels. The US produces that many barrels. Canada produces that many barrels. Russia produces that many barrels. So I'm going to assume that their production is fixed and what they sell to the world is given. So then what I have to do now is decide on my remaining chunk of market, the remaining part of the people who are not going to buy from these other producers, how much should I charge to for these remaining buyers? So essentially, I'm going to be a monopolist, but on a small segment of the market. I'm not going to, and I'm going to let the world market be price be what it is. And so they're going to then compete against each other this way. So everybody takes the production that everybody else has given. So they're sort of halfway between perfect competition and monopolist. We're going to see that if Cournot has only a single firm, then that's just a monopolist that sells to the entire world. But if I had an infinite number of firms, in Cournot oligopoly, that would be exactly the same as perfect competition. So, but now what we can have is a small number of firms. So like would be 5, 10, 15, and their price is going to be between the high price of the monopolist and the small price of perfect competition. Yeah, I can just write this down before we go. So assumption. So a uniform product is sold and each firm takes the production of their competitors as given and act as monopolist on their remaining share of the market. So by the way, so we're not going to assume, so that there's some other researcher at the time who was called Bertrand, who said, well, this model is stupid because if I see that all my competitors are selling at 12, then I could sell at 11.9 and capture all their sales. So I could compete in price and attract all the buyers from all the world because, yeah, and make a super big profit for myself. And he's essentially right in his own model. And what you would get essentially in this situation is the price would go down to where it would be in perfect competition. But that's not a super interesting model to use because yeah, it becomes a bit complicated. But so in modern competition theory, we use the Bertrand model, but here we are going to use the Cournot oligopoly, which is perfectly fine for us. And the Cournot oligopoly will allow us to move to monopolistic competition when we're done. Yeah, so I'm not going to introduce the model per se, but know that it looks pretty much like the monopolist. It's just that we have two firms instead of one firm. So if we have a duopoly, for instance. Okay, so questions so far, comments? No. So lots to digest. Digest well because we're continuing next time and hopefully finishing this chapter. Yeah, and seeing that I have to go not too fast, I have doubt I'm going to be able to see the gravity model at the end, but I can say a few words about it before the end of it. And then I'm going to post case studies for you to see what I'm asking you to do. All right, so finish for today.